Welcome to CEO Money. I'm Michael Yorba. Thanks for joining me. I've got Brice Penaud, CEO of Commercial Passport, on the show with me today. Brice, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, my pleasure. All right, Brice, tell us something about yourself and also what Commercial Passport does.
Sure. So I've always worked in startup companies, typically SaaS businesses that are helping sort of massive enterprises change large processes or renew or innovate processes. And Commercial Passport is no different from that. We're basically a cloud-based platform. It's purely working in the financial industry and capital markets to help these financial institutions digitally automate their KYC or AML onboarding, known as Know Your Customer or Know Your Client. So we're helping these institutions have a better relationship with their investors by helping them understand what they need to send into these institutions, what format they need to send it in, and also how to make sure that those documents are secure.
Now you're focusing on regulation, technical processes that are critical for regulation of the financial industry. Talk to me about that.
Sure. So we have a team internally that basically looks at multi-jurisdictional relationships and regulations to figure out what it is that these different institutions need to make sure that they're ahead of from a regulation standpoint. And we have these smart workflows and engine that's built into our system that helps their own customers understand what they need to do and how they need to submit their information. So this is essentially removing the burden of this back and forth paper-based process that most compliance teams suffer from with their clients. So we're changing the way that they operate and the way that they have their relationships with their own clients.
Tell me how you interweave blockchain into this process.
So typically when these documents come in, people want to know that there is a true source copy of these documents. And usually it's known as wet ink in the industry. And that is completely outdated, and that's been around for a long time. And you can see, for example, DocuSign has sort of disrupted that industry in itself. And so what we're doing to make sure that there is an immutable record of those documents, we are creating a hash of those documents and publishing them in a blockchain, so that people can look up the original versions of these documents to make sure that they meet regulatory standards. So this is helping people change from a paper-based process, but at the same time, increasing their level of security and their chain of custody of these documents.
Tell me about some of the challenges that you face going forward, the industry faces going forward.
I think that the biggest challenge is for people to teach their own teams and learn how to adopt new technology. It's always tough at the beginning. I think that the analogy is in Crossing the Chasm, for example, talking about when Sears first changed their entire systems to be digital when they had inventory and warehousing issues. And I believe they were the first company, massive global company, to change the system where they could track all their packaging, and it completely changed the way that they worked on supply management. And it takes time for people to learn how to do that, and so we're no different from that. The way that we're doing it is through document and through chain of custody of documents, but that is the same principle and the same idea. People have to learn how to use it. They have to be willing to understand that it's part of the future, and they need to be willing to make sure that their own people understand it. And our responsibility is to make sure that we're educating people to make sure that they have the tools and the resources necessary to do that.
Tell me about commercial passports.
Just the way that we work with financial institutions in general, or the concept of a commercial passport?
The concept of that, because from my understanding, what you're doing is revolutionizing the industry sector so that we're going to be able to have digital identities that are useful for corporations and humans. And with that, there is a whole chapter of things that fall off of that when it comes to following through on the documentation, being able to know your client, and being able to prove that that client is actually who they say they are, let alone as you were saying, the blockchain process for chain of ownership of documentation. So you get where I'm going with all that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, it's similar to the old analogy of the paper-based passport that, you and I probably hold. It's a paper version of that. And like you mentioned, there's consumers who are now moving towards a digital identity online that can be used for a whole host of different things, including maybe voting or opening a bank account. And we're doing that same thing, but for large entities that have a very complex structure. So we're not really working with consumers to that extent, but we're working with these enterprises who want a commercial passport, a passport that encompasses their entity, their relationships, and down to their ultimate beneficial owners, which is what regulation sort of stipulates. And when we do that, we remove the burden of having to do all of this paperwork. Once someone says, hey, I have one commercial passport, that's it. They can trade and they can start to move and have relationships with people, and that becomes a new standard way of doing business without having to redo this paper-based relationship every single time someone wants to have a new relationship with a financial institution.
That is the wave of the future. What's next for your company?
I think that there are a whole bunch of sister industries and sister problems that are similar to KYC. It could be anything from the initial onboarding of sub-documents or looking at OFAC or PEPs, any of these sort of checks that people want to do beforehand. And I think that we can essentially become the Salesforce of the KYC industry. And what I see for our company is essentially being in that same way, almost like an exchange where other people will build products around our solution in order to facilitate this process. So I think that that for us is the most important piece, is being the central location for these commercial passports where everyone else will work around us or within us.
I see a universal need for your product and your company. All right. Brice, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I really appreciate that. We have more conversations to partake in the product rollouts as you go forward. I appreciate you being on the show today.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. All right, you've been watching CEO Money with Michael Yorba. Thanks for joining us. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.